This is the West Kent Radio News feature. Hello, I'm Martin Webber. The Conservative Tom Tugendhat is standing again at the general election to be the MP for Tonbridge. He's among 7 candidates contesting the seat. And Tom Tugendhat joins me now. First of all, Tom, can you remind me of the experience you bring to the role of MP for Tonbridge?
Well, the last time we saw each other, Martin, was just after we'd saved the post office, and it was reopening just up the road from here on Tonbridge High Street. And that just demonstrates one of the many, many campaigns that I've been conducting here. As a former soldier, I know how important it is to deliver. And having had the privilege of serving this community for 9 years, there's a huge number of things we've achieved together. The new Edenbridge Medical Centre is a fantastic facility for the whole of the western area of the constituency. And then if you look at the High Street, look at the developments we've made in saving, yes, the post office, but also making sure that we are investing more in the shops, because Sainsbury's are going to put £20 million into the old Beales unit. My campaign, 3 years empty is plenty, has been a fantastic success and is getting real money into our community to transform a really important site. Now, there's a lot more to do.
So, Tom, it's been a rocky few years for the Conservative Party at Westminster, multiple changes of leader. Is there any point at which you thought maybe you're on the business and you might give up?
No, because I'm here to serve the people of Tonbridge. My absolute commitment has been to our community and to make sure that we're getting the best services we can. And that's why my commitment to making sure we have better train lines from Borough Green, to make sure that we have better flood protection, and the huge improvement in the Lye flood storage area that we've got through and is currently being built, so getting better every day, is a really important development for our whole community, keeping us safe from flooding and making sure homes and families are better protected.
But this is also a general election and voters are giving their verdict on the national politics of the Conservative Party. So what are you saying about the National Conservative Party's record?
Well, look, this town in particular, as you know very well, Martin, is really an educational town. There are some amazing schools like Judd and Tonbridge Grammar. There are some fantastic schools like Hillview and so many more that really make a difference to the lives of everybody here. And so many people actually move down to Tonbridge because of our fantastic schools. So one of the things that I talk about is the amazing transformation we've seen in education in England under this Conservative administration. When we came in 2010, the quality of education in the UK meant that we were not great compared to our European partners. We were in fact below some others in the United Kingdom. But now England not only has the best educational results in the United Kingdom, but actually some of the best in the Western world. For example, in reading and maths, we're amongst the best in the Western world according to the PISA statistics. These are fantastic achievements, really transforming lives and demonstrating a commitment to the next generation.
But what about the Conservative record on the economy? We have £2.7 trillion worth of debt now, partly because of COVID and then the energy crisis. But why is Rishi Sunak facing that now by promising voters £17 billion worth of tax cuts?
Well, he's able to do it now. That's really the transformation. Look, you're absolutely right. COVID was really difficult for everybody. And you don't just have to look at our economy, look at the United States, look at Germany, look at France. Any major economy really struggled during COVID for the very simple reason that we needed to sustain people in their homes at that point when people weren't able to go to work. It was the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do to make sure that we protected families and businesses that would otherwise have gone under. And just imagine the pain that would have caused to a community like ours where so many people are working. Now that does mean that, yes, you're right, there is a legacy of debt. And that did cause a rise in inflation, but Rishi has brought down that inflation rate, and Conservative policies have made sure that we are able to cope better. That's why we've got the fastest growth in the European elements of the G7, and we've got some of the fastest growth in the OECD. These are huge successes. And not only that, over the last 14 years, we've created about 800 jobs a day. Not directly, of course. That's businesses with the confidence to start up, individuals in our community showing the courage to begin an opportunity to innovate and start up. And that's why the promises that we're making now in this election are so important. Things like ending national insurance on the self-employed. It's hugely important. It's a really important way, not just in backing the self-employed who are taking that risk and starting a business, but actually in supporting a whole community who will benefit from the innovation and the jobs that they bring.
But voters' experience is also long waiting lists on the NHS. It's very, very difficult to get a GP appointment. Shouldn't any spare money, like this 17 billion, be spent on the NHS, like other parties are promising?
Well, as you know, over the last few years, we have massively increased spending on the NHS. It is now the highest it has ever been. And I think we all recognise that it isn't just a question of money. We've done about £700 million a week extra into the NHS over the last few years. That is transformational. And I can tell you that different GP clinics, different hospitals, different hospital trusts have dealt with it differently, and some have had really different areas of success. Now, the Maidstone and Tunbridge Wells Hospital Trust, led by Miles, has done amazingly well. They have just done fantastically brilliant work in making sure we have operations, we have beds, and we have doctors and nurses who are able to support an amazing community. That is a huge tribute, not just to those on the front line, but also to those who are supporting them. There are so many people in the NHS who are doing that. And we've had some real transformations in the primary care, the so-called, the GP's clinics around here. So the investment that we've seen in Edenbridge has transformed services, or the investment we've seen in Tonbridge Medical Group in that new practice has transformed services. Now, I want to do more of that here. I use warders, and I can tell you, warders are fantastic doctors, but that place needs a bit of an investment, and that's what I'm looking at now. We need to make sure we are delivering the transformational change in healthcare in our community to make sure we get better outcomes.
There is now £180 billion a year being spent on the NHS. It's a lot of money. It's a lot more. It's gone up by about 30 billion in not many years. But isn't there another issue about prevention? There have been lots of reports out saying that in the UK, obesity and other health issues could be avoided. Hasn't the Conservative government ignored various reports about how to monitor the food industry, manage the food industry to prevent issues like obesity?
No, I don't agree there, Martin. I think there's some fantastic organisations that made such a difference. And if I may, one that I know a lot of people who are watching this will be using every week is Parkrun. Parkrun has made a huge difference to people's feeling of health and engagement with sport, and that's so important. It's important because this isn't just about obesity, it's actually about being part of a community, part of a society, and feeling that you belong, because actually belonging, and that's one of the wonderful strengths of a community like ours, that you do feel you belong, but belonging is absolutely essential. And as a resident here, as somebody who actually lives here, I can tell you that this is one of the best communities in the world to live. And, it is a fantastic opportunity to be part of something. Now, in other areas, the work that we're doing on stopping smoking, the work that we're doing in supporting Tunbridge and Morning Borough Council in bringing forward healthier lifestyles and healthier options. All of this is a hugely transformative area. And, of course, doctors and teachers are also playing their part.
But it's still getting worse, isn't it? I mean, looking at Tunbridge High Street, there aren't a lot of very healthy options for people to buy on the High Street. There hasn't really been any transformation that many would say is appropriate for the huge increase in obesity that we've seen in the last 10 years.
Well, you see, I don't agree with you there, Martin, actually. If you go to Ian Chatfield, for example, who's a fantastic butcher on the High Street, he will be able to sell you some really healthy cuts of meat. If you go to Sankey's next door, the fish that they're selling is of absolutely the best quality and is really, really good stuff. And then if you look at the tea shops that are there, if you look at Basil's or if you look at Finch's, you can see that they're selling really healthy options. Now, if you want to get a cheese and ham toastie, and I'm not against it, you can certainly get one of those. And maybe that's not quite as healthy, but you can also get healthy salads and you can also get healthy sandwiches. And so I think there's a real range of options on the High Street. And, every now and again, if you'll forgive me, I don't mind having a full English as well.
On education, the Labour Party is promising to add 20% to private school fees by adding VAT. What do you think of that policy?
Well, let's be clear, Martin, it's not just 20% actually, it's 20% plus business rates. So it's even more. And that's going to be transformational for people here, because in our community there are many people who use private schools, not just Tonbridge School, which is one of the best schools in the country, but also schools smaller, more specialist, using or providing SEND provisions, special educational needs provision to kids in our community. And I'm afraid that's going to push for a lot of families, that's going to make it unaffordable. Now, that's not just bad for them. It's not just bad for all the people working in that school, all the teachers, all the specialists, all the cooks and the cleaners and the groundspeople and all those people who work in that community. It's actually bad for everybody in the educational system, because what it'll do is it'll push those people into other schools. So it'll put pressure on other school places. It's not going to save any money, it's going to cost money, and it's going to bring down the quality of teaching, sadly, for everybody just by putting pressure on others. Now, I know that teachers in our community are going to absolutely do their best to support everybody, and I'm sure that we're going to see some fantastic results again next year and the year after from fantastic schools. But that's why it's so important to choose who you're going to vote for, because a vote for anybody else except me is going to be effectively used as an endorsement for Labour, because it'll just increase a majority that they're trying to achieve here in the UK.
It may be that some people are tempted to vote for Reform UK because they look at your immigration record, and although you said you would limit immigration, you haven't, have you? It's gone up and up.
Well, look, you're absolutely right that there are real challenges with migration. That's one of the things that I've been working on in the Home Office, is trying to bring down those challenges, because working with the Home Secretary is making sure we have the information available to make sure that we're combating or tackling these criminal gangs that are bringing people over is hugely important.
But the biggest quantity of people coming in is those that the government have let legally come in, isn't it? It's a policy to have more people in the country to boost economic activity.
I think you'll see that it's a policy to support people who need that area of work. So if you look at our agricultural sector, for example, they've been needing some migration help over the last few years. And if you look particularly at our care sector, there's been a huge number of people who come in to care for our older people. But you're right, what we need to see is we need to see an actual economic transformation, because this isn't just about putting numbers up or down. This is about changing the incentive for people from our own community to do these jobs. Now, that means being able to pay more. That means being able to encourage more people to come into these areas. But that will only happen if we have more productivity, better remunerated jobs, and therefore the greater incentive to get into anything from agriculture to care to anything else.
But you say the incentives aren't right at the moment, but the Conservatives have been in power for 15 years. Shouldn't they have got those incentives right by now?
Well, if you look at one or two of the things that have changed in the last few years, you'll have noticed Brexit. Now, Brexit changed a huge number of those incentives, and COVID changed them again. And then, of course, the war in Ukraine also changed the cost of energy. Now, all those three things have had a really big impact on the way Labour works, on the way incentives work. They've changed the cost of travel, that's energy. They've changed the incentive to work from or away from home, that's COVID. They've changed your ability to have different levels of migration, that's Brexit. Now, all three of those have made a difference, and we're dealing with all three.
What about the plan to send illegal migrants to Rwanda? Hasn't an awful lot of time and money been spent on it, and it doesn't look like it's going to work?
Well, on the contrary, it's already beginning to work. If you listen to the Taoiseach, so the Prime Minister of the Republic of Ireland, he's already made the point that you're seeing migrants coming from Great Britain into Northern Ireland and then over the border into the Republic, because they're trying to avoid the risk of being sent to Rwanda. So we're already beginning to see that incentive, or rather that pressure, is beginning to have an effect. Now, this will only really have an effect when we start actively disrupting the routes by deterring people from taking the bet that is not going to pay off. And that's why this is so important. And again, nobody else has committed to this. And in fact, Keir Starmer has already said that he's going to abandon the policy even if it's working.
What about relations with Europe? The other parties want to work towards closer ties with Europe again. The Liberal Democrats think it'd be a good idea to rejoin the single market and return to free movement of people between the UK and the EU countries. What do you think of that policy?
Well, if you rejoin the single market, you need to rejoin all the rules that go along with it. Now, as somebody who did vote to remain in the European Union, I voted to remain so long as we had a seat at the table. What the Lib Dems are asking for is to take the rules but not have a say. That is the worst of all possible worlds. But there is so much that we can do working with the Europeans on. I have been working on intelligence sharing, on fighting terrorism together, on fighting serious and organised crime together, and even fighting fraud that sadly affects so many people. And some of that work that we've done, including fighting fraud gangs that are operating out of Romania, has reduced fraud in the United Kingdom by about 16% over the last year and about 13% the year earlier. So that is already making a difference. Working with our European partners is incredibly important, and that's not even including working with NATO to make sure we defend Ukraine.
What about climate emissions? What's your policy on bringing them down?
Well, look, we're very clear that what we've got to do is make sure that we live in a greener and safer world. And that's why we're making real promises that we can actually deliver. Now, you just have to look at our offshore wind production, for example. I don't know if you know, Martin, but the UK doesn't just have the world's largest offshore wind field. We have number 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. We also produce more solar than many countries in Europe. But most importantly, and I think this is the bit that really matters, while others are promising things that they know they can't deliver. We have made an absolute commitment to getting nuclear power, because the real green energy transformation is going to come when we have nuclear power available for everybody, bringing down not just the carbon emissions, but also the cost of energy. Because energy in this country, and by the way, around Europe as well, is much too high, because dependence on carbon products from the East and indeed from the Middle East has been too great. And what we need to do is make sure we have energy security, and we will only get that by having a proper energy policy, including nuclear.
That's energy emissions. You know, what people when people turn on their electricity and switch things on, that's changed a lot. But transport emissions haven't improved very much at all, have they? And partly that's because the government, under this government, the cost of going by rail has gone up hugely, and relatively the cost of driving has gone down.
Now, I think you'll see, actually, that the reality is that rail use is very high in this country. And in fact, from our community, getting that link from Borough Green into the city was hugely important for people in the northern end there, near Westmoreland, near Borough Green.
But the prices have soared, haven't they? I mean, they're about double per mile than they are in continental Europe.
Well, that's because we expect people who are using the train to pay for it and don't use other people to subsidise it. I mean, if people don't use the railways, why should they be subsidising it? Do you think they should?
But it depends what you include in the externalities of the cost, isn't it? At the moment, it's just so expensive for people to take the train. They don't. That's not good if you're trying to reduce transport emissions, is it?
I think the biggest problem for transport emissions here around this area is not the train, but the fact that it's very difficult to get public transport. And that's why, again this year...
You mean buses?
I'm about to bring that in. Exactly right, Martin. Again this year I'm going to introduce my bus survey, because actually getting kids onto buses and into school is so important for reducing emissions, and that's a huge area of work that we've done. But we've got to make sure that we have that transport security as well, and that's where I'm very concerned about the import of various goods from China, because it leaves us dependent on a country that hasn't always been friendly towards us, and certainly isn't currently anything other than extremely challenging. So we've got to be careful. We've got to make sure that what we're getting is we're getting energy security, transport security, and the ability to get to school, to work, or indeed to see family and friends.
But the area doesn't look that different to how it did 40 years ago when I was at school here, and it's just full of cars, full of traffic jams. People are. It's bad for the economy, isn't it? When all the small business people are stuck in vans, stuck in traffic jams, and nothing's changing.
So when I was here 40 years ago, it looked very different. I mean, I don't know which bits you're thinking about, but
The traffic jams have got worse. Is that what you're saying?
No, I think they've got much better. I remember being stuck on the A2 at very incredibly often out by Ightham, and being completely parked up effectively, waiting until the M20 was opened a few years later. So I remember all those that period of incredibly poor infrastructure investment, and now we're beginning to see a difference. Now the government has also put aside huge amounts of money, several £1 million, for Kent County Council to actually do something about some of these potholes. Because I don't know about you, but there's a few of us who've changed 1 or 2 more tyres than we would have liked because of these potholes, and that's something that we're really investing in.
Back on energy, the International Energy Agency has said there's enough oil and gas has been discovered all over the world now that we need, and if we burn it, that's the maximum we can have to save the planet and stop bad climate change. And yet the UK government, the Conservative government, has approved new exploration and development of North Sea oil fields. Labour aren't going to improve anymore, so why are you?
So what Labour are doing is effectively they're making us more dependent on Russia and more dependent on the Middle East, because nobody thinks that we're not going to need gas for the energy transformation over the next 30 years. Nobody has got any way of doing that except by switching off the lights and closing down companies. Now, if you want to make people unemployed, fine, tell people that's what you're going to do. What we need to do is
But can't we just invest instead in green energy? We've done a lot already, but shouldn't we just do more?
We can, and that's exactly what we're doing, and that's why I was speaking about nuclear energy. But that takes time to build, and that's why we are committed to it. Now look, we were committed to it in 2010, but the Lib Dems said it wouldn't be ready till 2021, so it wasn't worth doing. That was what Nick Clegg said. He was wrong then, and the Lib Dems are wrong now. And the Greens, who oppose all nuclear, are completely wrong, because actually what they're trying to do is they're trying to make sure that you can't do anything. What we need to do is we need to have a proper transition to a greener economy, to a safer economy that guarantees our energy security and makes sure that jobs, that people, that individuals, that families can get around, can enjoy life in our wonderful country, but can also have the opportunity to protect our environment at the same time. Now, the UK today produces less than 1% of global carbon emissions. We need to be working internationally. Countries like China and India are incredibly important. They're in the 20%.
But our emissions per person are very similar to China now, aren't they? So why should we, as a rich country, not do our bit to reduce them?
Well, China is a rich country, and China is building new coal-fired power stations. Germany, which did away with nuclear a number of years ago, has now gone away from gas and has gone back to the dirtiest kind of coal. This is why international agreements matter, because it's not okay to export jobs to China or to Germany only for them to be made with dirty coal and for us to pretend that that doesn't count towards our carbon emissions. It's rubbish. Of course it does. And that's why we need to have a proper energy transformation, and that's why we also need to have the energy security of having the gas that is near home rather than shipping it thousands of miles over the seas in liquid form all the way from the Middle East.
Gatwick Airport wants to expand. Given the framework provided by the Conservative government, it thinks it can legally do that expansion. Do you support Gatwick expansion?
No, and I've been extremely clear. For 9 years now, I have opposed Gatwick's expansion. I spoke at a public hearing only the other day, and I have been absolutely clear that it is unacceptable for them to be concentrating the noise and the disruption on our community because of this expansion. Look, you wouldn't be allowed to build a motorway through Tonbridge without massive planning regulations. Why are you allowed to put one over our heads?
But it's the Conservative government that you've been part of that is allowing that possibility.
On the contrary, what we've allowed is we've allowed people to have their say. What Labour are saying, and Keir Starmer said it very clearly in an interview, he said if he needs to create enemies, he will bulldoze these things through. He will change infrastructure rules so that you don't get a say. Now, if you want that, that's what Labour are offering. So Keir Starmer knows better than you do. I don't think that's right. I think communities should have a say and have a choice, and I think we should have a voice, and I'm here to make sure that we do.
What do you think about Labour's housing plans?
Well, I'm completely confused as to what they are, because again, what they're saying and what they're offering are two completely different things. They're talking about building more houses, but actually they haven't put any money behind it, they haven't put any commitment behind it, and the only thing that they've done is they've said they're going to ignore local communities. Well, frankly, that is a policy for creating huge amounts of disruption and meaning that you don't get the infrastructure along with the housing, which is exactly what we're doing. So there are some really good housing developments in this community. In fact, in Kings Hill, there's a really, really beautiful development that has been built at the same time as the infrastructure, the GP surgeries, the roads, the schools that go along with it. And that's been a real demonstration of successful development. Now that's the kind of development we need, not Sir Keir's answer, which is to bulldoze, to ignore and to decide for you.
Finally, Tom, could you just sum up why you think voters in Tonbridge should vote for you at the general election?
Over the next 4 or 5 years, we have so many things we need to do in our community. We need to get a better rail link to Gatwick, but we also need to stop the second runway. We need to improve our medical facilities, and we need to make sure that we have better education results in our community. We need to protect our green spaces, and we need to make sure that people have homes and the ability to live with their families and to live near their friends. Now, I've got a track record of delivery, not just as Security Minister and keeping our country safe, and not just chairing the Foreign Affairs Committee and making sure that our country is properly engaged around the world, but also as a soldier and as a man of Kent of many, many, many years. I've delivered for this community time and again, and I'd love to keep serving it because this is the best part of the whole of the United Kingdom. This community is the best in the world, and I love living here. I love being part of it, and I love serving it.
Tom Tugendhat, thank you very much.